All right, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So these are meant to be very short and sweet. Uh, we're just going to look at one hadith that gives us something to think about in terms of our reminder for the day of Jumu'ah and the merits of Jumu'ah. And the reason why I do it is because technically the day starts at night, right? So Thursday evening is when we should begin to think about what we should be doing for Yom al Jumu'ah in terms of our etiquette and other things. And so, very briefly, I'm going to go back and look at one hadith, the one we related last week. You can go back, you can check the video on that. And so this one also is given to us by Imam Muslim, rahimahullah, and this is generally in his Kitab al-Jumu'ah, right, in his chapters that relate specifically to the topic of the day of Jumu'ah. And so when we talk about Jumu'ah, we're talking about al-yawm, al-khutbah, al-salah. Generally, those are the main three aspects. There's also the evening, right? But the day of Jumu'ah, and that includes the night, right? The khutbah of Jumu'ah, and then the salah of Jumu'ah. And so those will be the main things that we are going to look at, inshallah, to talk about some of the fada'il or the merits of the day of Jumu'ah. And so this one today is from the Babun fi sa'ati allati fi yawm al-Jumu'ah. And so this one is going to relate to a statement of the Prophet ﷺ in which he talked about the hour on the day of judgment or in the day of Jumu'ah, right? And there is an hour in the day of Jumu'ah that has some special significance to it. And before we even proceed into the particulars of that, we should remember that في زمان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وعند العرب, right, their فهمهم وفهمنا ليس سواء, right? Their understanding of what was an hour and our understanding of an hour is not necessarily the same, because our understanding of an hour is very mechanical. Right? We're all essentially like German citizens. Like we have the Swiss-German tick-tock, right? 60 seconds equals a minute and 60 minutes equals an hour. This is not necessarily the case. It does refer to a short-ish block of time, especially as it relates, right, to this life. Of course, then, there is the final hour, right? And even then that idea of the sa'a, like will the last 60 seconds of the last 60 minutes of dunya, will it really only be 60 minutes, or what does that mean, right? So just keeping that in mind, that we are not talking about the tick-tock of a watch. Okay, and so in this one, and I will kind of read, I said just for brevity's sake, we will skip most of the rijal, most of the narrators, and go to simply the sahabi who relates it. So in this case, we're going to go to an al-A'raj, عن أبي هريرة أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال. So this one is related by Abu Huraira again, and he reports that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم ذكر يوم الجمعة. And so he mentioned on the day of Jumu'ah, also about the day of Jumu'ah, فقال. And so he said, and we'll read the matan, the text of the hadith first, and then we'll discuss some of its significance. فيه ساعة. There is a sa'a, there is an hour. فيه ساعة لا يوافقها عبد مسلم وهو يصلي يسأله الله شيء إلا أعطاه إياه. And so the Prophet ﷺ reported that there is a sa'a, there is an hour in the entirety of the day of Jumu'ah, in which if a abdun Muslim, not just abd and not just Muslim, but what? A Muslim who is devotional. A Muslim that is devotional. Because there's a difference. Some of us, we believe in Allah and the Messenger, ﷺ, but we're not devoted. And then we wonder why is Allah not answering my dua, and all of these things that people constantly ask. Well, ask yourself, how devoted are you in your worship? So the Prophet ﷺ gives us immediately off the bat, declaring that what abdun Muslim, right? That he what yusalli. So not only is he devoted, he or she, because here huwa means like al-jama', right? Bil-ma'na al-jama' fi sighat al-mufrad. It's spoken with the meaning of a group, but it's referring just using the singular. And so he says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that what is abdun muslimun yusalli. This is a person who is, they're maintaining the shara'i, right? They're maintaining all of their duties to Allah in terms of, doing the prayer and whatnot, but then they are also abd. They are generally devoted. And so he says, yes, Allah shay'an, and that person then will ask Allah for something, illa a'tahu iyyahu, right? Except that Allah will give it to him. And then fi riwayah, there is another narration. We have this with hadith, that there will be one riwayah, one narration, and then we'll find other ones that either give us some additional information, they add to it. And so in this additional information, it says Zada Qutaba, right? And so Qutaba is one of the people involved in the narration. He said, was Zada Qutaba fi riwayatihi. He said, what? Ashara biyadihi yuqalliluha. And so he says in his own narration, adding to it, that when in relating it, he ashara biyadihi, he made a little gesture with his hand, yuqalliluha, giving us an extra indication that indeed out of the entirety, and okay, if you have 24 hours in a day, let's just take that as a rough example. If there's 1 hour, that is qalil, that is a little bit, right? So he's saying that it's something very precious, right? That it says, وَأَشَارَ بِيَدِهِ يُقَلِّلُهَا. Tamam. Now, Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, gives us some additional information to consider about this hadith, that again, on the day, within the day of Jumu'ah, there is an hour that is special, that for the devoted Muslim who is praying, that if they ask Allah for something, He will inshallah give it to them. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to fall out of the sky, but what? Inshallah, you will receive it if it is good for you. We have to understand that, right? If you ask for something evil, Allah is not going to, right, necessarily give that to you, right? Especially if you're a good devoted person, and maybe in your judgment you think it's good, but in reality it's bad. Ultimately, Allahul Alim al-Hakim. Allah ultimately is the possessor of all knowledge and knows what is right and wrong and can decide. So he says, قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم في يوم الجمعة في ساعة لا يوافقها عبد مسلم وهو يصلي يسر الله شيئا إلا أعطاه وفي رواية قائم يصلي. So he says in an additional narration of this hadith, that if the person is قائم يصلي. What does this mean, قائم يصلي? Well, it doesn't mean literally he stands up and prays. It can also mean what? Is upright. Right? هو أو هي على الصراط المستقيم. They are what? قيم. They are, right, standing. But it can also refer to يمكن هو يدعو وهو قائم. Perhaps he's standing and making, because as we will see, وفي رواية هي ساعة خفيفة. It is a very, when they say khafifa, I mean, it might even be less than that 16 minutes. We say it's a short period of time. So في رواية وهي ساعة خفيفة. So it should give us a sense of urgency and also a sense of appreciation of the day of Jumu'ah. You know, sometimes you see people and you ask them, hey, how's it going? And they're like, another day, another dollar. This is not the attitude of the Muslim. وفي رواية أشار يده يقللها. We covered this. He mentioned with his hand that what it was small in terms of its quantity at this time. وفي رواية أبي موسى الأشعري, one of the great Sahabi, said, وأنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, هي ما بين ما يجلس الإمام إلى أن يقدر الصلاة. Some say, this is between the time where you come just before the khutbah, right? And the imam is going to get up on the mimbar. And so it might be that time. So again, when you come to Jumu'ah, one, we already know, maybe we'll cover that next week, that We know the reward that you get and the encouragement. That's the whole purpose of reward. When either Allah Ta'ala promises us a reward or that the Prophet ﷺ says there will be a reward, it's what? Encouraged to actually do the thing. And so we know if we come early for Jumu'ah, there's a greater reward. The earlier you come, the greater the reward. And so in this, he says, what? سَمِعْتُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, I heard the Prophet say, what? يقول هي ما بين أن يجلس الإمام إلى تقطع الصلاة. It's the time when the Imam comes in and then the prayer is completed. So when you come for Jumu'ah, it's just not chop it up hour, right? Focus, what are you here for? You're here for the ibadah, right? It's here for the ibadah. You're here to gain some, right, to get your sins expiated, to remove, to get some hasanat, to get some barakah, to get some ilm, to get some tadhkirah, get some knowledge, get some reminder. So when you come in, of course, afshu salam. The Prophet ﷺ said what? Spread the salam. But that's different than twittering around and chattering like little birds, right? Be serious about, because what? This day is not like any other day. Be serious about it. And so when you come in, try to have a sense of, purpose. Because if you waste your time prattling with other people, which you can do at other times and other days, you may rob yourself, because as we will see, there's an interesting characteristic between this sa'a, هذه الساعة يوم الجمعة وليلة القدر. There's an interesting characteristic that both this hour on the day of Jumu'ah and the characteristic of Laylatul Qadr that they both share. وقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, إلى أن تقطع الصلاة. So until the prayer is completed. So it could be any time, right, until Salatul Jumu'ah is completed. وهو بتاء, so he goes into, what does that mean? والقاضي قال القاضي. And so Imam al-Nawawi relies greatly upon Al-Qadi Iyad al-Maliki, right, who is the very famous Maliki jurist. He said, اختلف السلف في وقت هذه الساعة. So this is important. This is where we begin to see some of the similarities between the Laylatul Qadr in Ramadan, right, the so-called night of power. It's not Qadr, Qudra is power. Laylatul Qadr, and then also this one. So he said the Salaf, they differed, meaning the Sahaba, والتابعون وأتباعهم رضي الله عنهم أجمعين. They differed about, what was this particular time, just as they differed about what day is Laylatul Qadr. We don't know with precision. And so he continues by saying, في معنى قائم يصلي فقال بعضهم هي من بعد العصر إلى المغرب. Some of them said that when it's a person is standing, it could be any time from after Asr all the way until the Maghrib Salah. That's one opinion. وقالوا معنى يصلي يدعو. And so the Salaf, right, the scholars of the Sahaba and those that came after them in the early generations, in this case, when the Prophet ﷺ said yusalli, huwa abdul Muslim yusalli, right, that he is a devoted Muslim who's praying, yusalli yani yad'u, it means he's making dua. So it doesn't literally mean, as according to some of the difference of opinion of the Salaf, it could mean that he's praying, but in this also means to make dua. For instance, when we say in the dua, when we hear the name of the Prophet, we say what? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallama. Sallah. We are not making salah, but we are making a dua. So this is also one of the meanings of salah and salawat. One of the meanings of that can mean to yani dua, to make dua. And so he says that what? وَمَعَنَا قَائِمٌ, and as it relates to the word qa'im, it is malazim and mawadhib, right? That it is, again, somebody who is doing it all the time. So one of the important understandings of the Salaf as it relates to this hadith about this special hour on Jumu'ah, and we always, I want Allah to answer my dua. Why is my dua being, why am I fit? How consistent are we in our worship of Allah, in our dhikr, in our attendance to Him Azza wa Jal? So the Salaf understood that as it relates to being a Abdul Muslim yusalli, yani yad'u, yani qa'im, it means what? Malazim. That you have to be somebody that you do it consistently and you never leave from it. And so this is helping us to expand what it means in our understanding of what to be devoted to Allah. And he says, for instance, كَقَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى مَا دُمْتَ عَلَيْهِ قَائِمًا. And so this is like the verse that we see, for instance, where Allah talks about the people of Ahl al-Kitab, right? This is like the people from Ahl al-Kitab. And Allah says that if you were to give them a single dinar, right, they might not give it back to you. Whereas if you were to give them a whole pile of money, they will return it to you to every last cent. What is in this? Very briefly. Because sometimes when we feel that a thing is very valuable, ظاهرة, right, on its outwardness, we will act in a certain way that reflects that, right? And so, if you give a person an old beat up $200 car, they don't really care. But man, you give somebody a Bentley, right? They're going to treat it with, tenderness and gentleness and all. They're going to have a greater amount of ihtiram and respect for it. This is the same way as Allah Ta'ala is talking about, right, with some of the Ahl al-Kitab. And they're mentioning it here because what? Sometimes with a great thing, outwardly, we will have also a great outwardly reverence for that thing. But when sometimes that thing is right, khafiyya, it's not apparent, then likewise, we'll belittle it. What's this 1 hour? Or it's not been introduced to us or inculcated to us in a way that we understand that this is a major, major thing. And so for this reason, he is citing the verse, or part of the verse, مَا دُمْتُمْ عَلَيْهِ قَائِمًا, right? And so when we get to the idea of qa'im, right, and the malazim, right, somebody's constantly doing it. And so likewise with this practice, you will have to stay on it. It will take a certain level of attention, right, to stay upon it. وَقَالَ آخِرُونَ هِيَ مِنْ حِينَ خُرُوجِ الْإِمَامِ إِلَى فَرَاغِ الصَّلَاةِ. And then the others had said that, again, going back to this idea, well, it's the time, right, from when the imam comes out until after the prayer is done. وَحِينَ تُقَامُ الصَّلَاةِ حَتَّى يَفْرَغْ وَالصَّلَاةُ عِنْدَهُمْ عَلَى ظَهْرِهَا. وَقِيلَ مِنْ حِينَ يَجْلُسُ الْإِمَامِ على المنبر حتى يفرغ من الصلاة. Okay, so it's just all of these other narrations about it's related to the imam and ascending the minbar and after the salah, right? وقيل آخر ساعة, right, as in it relates to من يوم الجمعة قال القاضي رميت عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في كل هذا آثار مفسرة لهذا الأقوال قيل هي عند الزوال. Some others said this is like goes to the time of the shadow of the sun, right? وَقِيلَ مِنَ الزَّوَالِ إِلَىٰ أَنْ يُصَيْبَ الظَّلْ, that it goes all the way from the time of dhuhr until like the length of your arm of the shadow of the sun, نَحْوَ الذِّرَاعِ, right? If it goes like an arm's length. وَقِيلَ, and this is the part I wanted to highlight here, some of the early companions, they understood what هي مخفية في اليوم كله كليلة القدر. Its time is actually hidden and not precisely known in the same way that Laylatul Qadr is also not precisely known. And so what would behoove one with this hour on Jumu'ah, and like it would behoove one in the month of Ramadan, right? We don't just wait around. We skip the fasting. We're not praying. We just wait until what, the 27th of Ramadan, put all of our money on lucky number 27, roll the dice. This kind of like gambler's idea when it comes to, right, Laylatul Qadr. No, you want to have an attitude of general reverence and dedication and worship of Allah throughout the month and taking advantage, because technically any night could be Laylatul Qadr. There are ahadith that give more weight to certain opinions, but none of them can essentially do away with the others. And so if we really want to also understand that in this, makhfiyah, in this hidden nature of the ajr, of the reward, of the hasanat, that there is even something for us, because it causes us to be habitual, to be malazim, to be constant in our devotion to Allah, instead of being lazy and then a sudden quick burst of action and then going back to ghafla. going back to heedlessness. No, this is not what Allah Ta'ala wants us to do, and this is not what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching. وَمِن طُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ إِلَى طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ. Some said it's from essentially the time the sun shows up in the morning at Fajr all the way until sunset. وقال القاضي يعني قاضي عياد, he said وليس معنى هذه الأقوال أن هذه كله وقت لها, right? بل معناه أنها تكون في أثناء ذلك الوقت. He said all of these generally, there's some problems with them, but what we should really understand of the meaning is that it is a praise of the time itself. Again, stop looking for silver bullets in your worship with Allah, but rather the fact that the Prophet ﷺ has said there is an hour in the day. Have a sense of what? Have a sense of scrupulousness, right? Try to avoid sin. Try to avoid backbiting. We should be doing this all the time, but be even more careful of how you act on Yawm al-Jumu'ah than on other days. And this coincides, right, with the Prophet ﷺ, what? Mondays and Thursdays. Yawm al-Ithnain wa Yawm al-Khamis, right? He said what? The deeds go up. I want to be sa'im, I want to fast on those days when my deeds are ascending. Right? I want to be in a certain state when Allah is reviewing me, so to speak. And so similarly for Friday, right? Try to make that a day of utmost comportment, right? Dress well when you come to the masjid, be clean, be quiet, be courteous, be reflective, be devoted, be worshipful, and so on. And so we also have with us, I'll relate this hadith next week because I think this covers enough. I want to really just restrict it to one. So what can we take away from this very briefly to wrap up? Yawm al-Jumu'ah is a blessed day. Not this Jumu'ah Mubarakah nonsense that people often say, because where does this come from? This is an imitation of Ahl al-Kitab, right? We don't find this saying, and I know people, but we don't really find, this is nothing but a tashabbuh Ahl al-Kitab. And so, in my opinion, it's something generally we should leave off. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it if you choose to say it, Allahu A'lam. But again, it's not, but we should not reduce the significance of Yawm al-Jumu'ah to just running around everybody saying Jumu'ah Mubarakah. And by the way, at least if you're going to say it, say Jumu'ah Mubarakah, not Jumu'ah Mubarak. At least be grammatically correct, right? Because wahad mu'annath wa wahad mu'annath. One is in the feminine voice, or at least be feminine with your description, right? So we should not reduce it to that, or just going on social media and Jumu'ah Mubarakah. What are you doing to actually get the barakah? What are you doing to get the ajr? Are you asking Allah, ask yourself on Yawm al-Jumu'ah, هل أنا عبد مسلم يصلي يدعو قائم? Am I these things or am I not? So inshallah, ونسأل الله بالتوفيق, inshallah والعافية. We ask Allah for success, inshallah, in this endeavor to make us amongst those who will, inshallah, سنكون من القائمين يوم الجمعة ومن المصليين يوم الجمعة, and make us from amongst those that Allah Ta'ala inshallah will answer the dua for us, and that it will be a means inshallah at-taqarrub ilayhi azza wa jal, that it will be a means of drawing closer to Him. ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا محمد سيدنا الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. All right.